So this is the world in which people live. And yet a whole lot of sales organizations and a whole lot of leaders are just telling their people to add to that noise. Send more emails, make more phone calls, send more connection requests on LinkedIn, more. You are just part of the noise. If you really want to thrive today, you've got to rise above that noise. You've got to do something different. You got to do something better. You think about anybody you want to talk to, someone you want to sell to, or some top talent that you want to hire, whatever the case may be. There's a whole lot of other people who also want to talk to that person. What are you going to do to become the one that they want to talk to? Because that'll change everything. And when we start thinking about that way with more empathy for the world in which our intended audience operates, then
Yes.
we start throwing out these old mindsets and these old playbooks, and we start doing things completely differently.
Welcome to the Internal Marketing Podcast, the unique podcast series that flips the marketing conversation from external to internal, exploring all the ways that companies can build a brand and drive growth by engaging and empowering its employees to become powerful advocates of the company brand. I'm your host, Kerry-Ann Stimson, and I'm very happy to bring you this episode where we'll be talking about how companies can empower employees to sell on social media. But first, do you wonder if your internal emails are being read and engaged with? Then take a look at Workshop. Workshop is the #1 email platform for internal communications that integrates with all of your favorite comms channels and data sources. With a tool like Workshop, you can easily track the results of your emails with real-time analytics. You can cross-post your messages to the channels that your team uses the most, like Slack and SharePoint, and you can discover what content performs the best so that you can improve your internal communication strategy over time. Go beyond open rates to measure the effectiveness of your internal emails. Learn more at useworkshop.com. Now, let's jump into this conversation with my featured guest, Steve Watt. Steve is the Director of Market Insights and the Social Selling Subject Matter Expert at Seismic, and he'll be sharing about how companies can empower their employees to sell on social media. Hi, Steve. Thank you for joining me on the Internal Marketing Podcast. So great to have you.
Oh, great to be here, Kerry-Ann, and I'm glad we've upgraded our relationship from LinkedIn friends to now podcast friends.
Absolutely. I love following your content on LinkedIn, and I know we're going to get into that a little bit later on, but that's how we would have connected. And of course, when I thought of this conversation about the whole concept of social selling, I mean, you were like the #1 name on my list, right? As the person, the subject matter expert who would be great to talk about this. So I'm excited about this conversation because, of course, this is the Internal Marketing Podcast. And as I always like to say, internal marketing is really about how do we engage and empower employees, company employees, to be advocates of the company brand. And one of the offshoots, I believe, of employee advocacy is really not just about building the brand, it's the whole matter of social selling, right? So I really would love to start out with a level setting question, Steve, because I don't like to assume that everyone is always familiar with the nomenclatures that we use. So we're probably familiar with employee advocacy, but would you start out by sharing with us a nice working definition of what social selling is, Steve, and perhaps too how is it different from employee advocacy?
That is an excellent place to start because there is not clear agreement. And I'm sure not everyone is going to agree with what I'm about to say. I want to start with what the old definitions of those are and how I'm trying to change it. So traditionally, social selling has been seen as a very transactional hunting approach, right? LinkedIn has 900 million members. Everybody we want to sell to, or the great majority of them, have a profile. Let's just send our salespeople out to hunt. And they can treat LinkedIn like a giant Rolodex. They can look up everybody that they wish they could have a meeting with, and they'll just come barreling into that person's world with a connection request, with a pitch slap, as I like to say, just like, hey, Kerry-Ann, here's who I am. Here's who we are. Can we get on a call? How's Tuesday at 2:00? And this presumption that me coming charging into your world, that you're going to be receptive to that. And the reality is, maybe 6 or 8 years ago, people were receptive to that because it was
Yeah.
all kind of new. But now,
Hmm.
anyone you want to talk to, there's probably 100 other salespeople who want to talk to them as well. So that old hunting mindset does not work. That's traditional social selling. Traditional employee advocacy, I characterize as being a cheerleader for the company. It's just rah, rah, us, us, us. We're so great. We won an award. We're having a webinar next Wednesday. Our CEO was
Yay.
quoted in the news. We just released a new report. Yay, us.
Yeah.
And, this is something that companies have been trying to activate for a long time, and they always struggle because the reality is a lot of your people, they might love their job. They might love their coworkers, but they don't really want to turn their social presence into essentially an advertising brochure for their company, right? I like to say that is like treating your people like a Wi-Fi extender for your marketing motion. And most of your people don't want to be Wi-Fi extenders. It's not very empowering. And the other problem with it is
Not
it's
at
not
all.
very interesting to your customers and your partners and the people you want to hire and others that you want to influence. If every time you see Steve on LinkedIn, I'm just cheerleading my employer, you tune me out and just, he's an advertising robot, right? He's a Wi-Fi extender. I'm not interested.
Yeah.
So that's the problem with traditional social selling and with traditional employee advocacy. I believe there is a new way, a better way that actually brings these two things together, much, much closer, and makes it much more audience oriented, much more client centric, buyer centric, audience centric. And what it requires is changing your mindset. Instead of hunting or instead of advertising, to actually show up on social with an honest intent to educate, inspire, and help other people. And in particular, to try to help your
Mm.
customers, your future customers, your partners, the people you want to hire, everybody else. So when you flip it around and instead of it being selfish, instead you make it about them. Now you start engaging with people in completely different ways. You start sharing completely different types of content. You're supporting others. You're not just cheerleading your company, you're actually demonstrating who your company is and who you serve and what kind of difference you make in your customers' world. And as a result, you start to make yourself a magnet. You become a magnet for the right conversations with the right people. And depending on your role and depending on your objectives, those could be sales conversations. They could be brand building conversations. They could be thought leadership conversations. They could be talent acquisition conversations or all sorts of other things. We need to flip our mindset around and be much less selfish and much more focused on our audience. And then everything starts to change. So, really long answer to your short question, but I think it sets the stage of the problem as it now exists. And it sets the stage of the opportunity to do better.
I love it. And what I'm picking up, Steve, it's really just reframing your mindset that you really should be coming from a place of generosity, right? Just thinking about how can I give? How can I share? How can I be better and do better for my audience so that they benefit and that builds trust. And in building trust, it creates those opportunities. I love that response, Steve. So,
Absolutely. Trust. You said, let me just jump in for one sec.
yeah, please.
You said one of the most critical words there, trust.
Mm,
Right? What I say is when you do this stuff well,
yeah.
you build your reputation, both inside and outside the firm.
Yes,
A lot of people
indeed.
don't think about what it means inside the firm. We could talk about that if you want. But
Oh,
you're
yeah.
building reputation, you're building relationships. Probably most importantly, as you said, you're building trust. And we
Mhm.
do business with people we know, like, and trust. We
That's
want to
right.
buy from them, we want to partner with them, we want to work for them and with them. I mean, whatever your goals are, when you build reputation, relationships, and trust, good things
Mhm.
happen.
Absolutely, absolutely. And in a world where trust is declining, particularly trust in traditional organizations or traditional bodies like government and so on, people tend to now, as you say, want to do business with people that they trust. They'd prefer to do business with people and to do business with a nameless, faceless brand kind of a thing. And I think that's a great place to start, Steve. So, given your wonderful definition, which really fits in with how we do business today, why should, in your view, companies incorporate social selling as part of their growth strategy?
Most of all, because it's an incredibly noisy, hyper competitive world. And if we don't do something different and something better, then we're just part of the noise. Sellers in particular and sales leaders to build a little more empathy for the world in which their buyers and their prospective buyers live. And that is a world where they are being inundated with sales outreach, with marketing messages everywhere they go, and they're fed up. Like they are blocking it out, right? So this is the world in which people live. And yet a whole lot of sales organizations and a whole lot of leaders are just telling their people to add to that noise. Send more emails, make more phone calls, send more connection requests on LinkedIn, more. You are just part of the noise. If you really want to thrive today, you've got to rise above that noise. You've got to do something different. You got to do something better. You think about anybody you want to talk to, someone you want to sell to, or some top talent that you want to hire, whatever the case may be. There's a whole lot of other people who also want to talk to that person. What are you going to do to become the one that they want to talk to? Because that'll change everything. And when we start thinking about that way with more empathy for the world in which our intended audience operates, then
Yes.
we start throwing out these old mindsets and these old playbooks and we start doing things completely differently. And we have to.
Yeah.
We
We
have to,
have
or
to.
else we're just lost in the noise.
And again, back to your initial point that if we are perceived as the one who is generous, who is positioned in a way that we're really helping you and we're putting you first, we're putting your needs even perhaps above ours, or certainly that's a perception we create when we continue to be generous and providing value added content and help. You're going to be top of mind and they're ready to do business. I mean, Steve, for someone who's listening, I mean, is social selling the way we've been discussing it here, is it best suited for certain types of companies in certain industries, or is it something that any company can adopt as part of a strategy for growth?
I think there's some of both sides of your question. To some extent, it's valuable for everybody. But then there's certain areas where it's more or less valuable. Let's start where it's valuable for everybody. Enabling and empowering your people to show up and speak up with confidence and purpose, to really
Yes.
demonstrate expertise in what they do and passion for the outcomes that they bring to their customers. That is good for everybody. And it's not just a sales motion. As I said, I like to take these two things, social selling and employee advocacy, that used to be pretty different. And I see them like a big Venn diagram where they overlap
Mm,
significantly in this new approach that I recommend.
yes.
And obviously the outcomes, the edges of that Venn diagram are a little bit different, but the core, the center of it is the same. Right? It's that reputation, relationships, trust. It's being seen and heard and understood. And this drives sales outcomes and marketing outcomes and talent acquisition outcomes and more. That is something valuable for every firm. People talk a lot about their great culture. Well, how about instead of telling us, how about you show us? And one aspect of great culture is empowered people who know what they're doing, love what they're doing, love who they do it with and who they do it for, and know that it matters. Know that what they do and what their company does makes a difference in their clients' lives. And when you show that in authentic ways, not just everybody reposting your blog, but when you show that in really human ways, authentic ways, it helps you retain talent. It helps you attract top talent, people who have lots of other job options. They start looking at you, right? So
Yes.
this is something that every firm can do. When you get a little more specific into the motion of the sales, social selling and that motion, it is more valuable when you have larger deal sizes, more complex sales cycles, more uncertain outcomes. If you
Mm,
sell a commodity product that everybody knows and everybody understands, It's a widget. We've all bought these widgets before, and we're going to buy these widgets again. It's probably a lot less about the person I'm buying from. It's probably a lot more about the price. It's about the warranty. It's about whatever you have. So
Yeah.
there are industries where it's transactional, it's easily understood. We know when a widget works and when it doesn't work. The I'm not going to say that the reputation and the relationship of the seller doesn't matter in that world. It does, but it doesn't matter as much. When you talk about technology and professional services and financial services, where it's not a widget, it's not like a little thing I'm buying. I'm buying expertise. I'm buying relationship. I'm buying a complex implementation of software, whatever it may be. In those environments, then trust reigns supreme, and credibility and reputation and subject matter expertise is so critical. So I say this is something that every firm should be thinking about, but the larger your deal sizes, the more complex they are, and the more uncertain the outcomes, then the more critical this becomes.
Then, I want to just kind of maybe dig into this point that you've just made about every firm doing it from the standpoint that, yeah, I understand that it's perhaps more functional for firms, as you rightly said, with more complex transactional processes, the deal sizes will be larger and uncertain outcomes. But again, we're in the internal marketing podcast space. And I always like to say that it starts in the culture of the organization. The culture of the organization, to my mind, is always the determinant of whether or not a great social selling strategy or culture of social selling slash employee advocacy is going to thrive. In your view, Steve, what role does culture and employee engagement play in making sure that you're setting up your organization for social selling success in the current environment?
Yeah. A huge, and it's both cause and effect. Like
Yeah,
you're right that a foundation of a good culture is going to be necessary to be successful, but then doing this right will also empower that culture. So it becomes a bit of a positive circle. But let's
yeah,
start with specifically your question. How important is the existing culture to this? It is very important, because if it's a culture of, keep your head down and your mouth shut, well, then this is going to be very foreign. If it's a culture of fear, this is going to be very foreign. If it's a culture of,
mm,
you know, people who are not empowered or engaged, they're really just kind of punching the clock and doing their job, then they're not going to want to do this. So
no,
if it's a culture where the only voices that matter are the most senior voices, the highest paid person in there, was it the hippo, the highest paid person's opinion? If it's that kind of culture, then you're going to have a hard time with any credibility saying to people, we value your voice and we respect that you're an expert in your space, and we want to enable and empower you to go out and be visible in the public. If you don't feel empowered in your own firm, how on earth are you going to take that out into the public sphere? So yes, that
exactly.
that empowerment and that culture of trust and of, we are all valuable to the firm, and it's not only the executive voices that matter. That's a really important foundation for the firm.
Steve, I know that obviously you're a subject matter expert in this space, and I'm sure you've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly of companies who have been doing social selling in the way that we've been describing it here. Could you share a couple of examples, perhaps, of companies in your view who are doing it very, very well?
Sure. Here's the disclaimer. I don't think any large companies are doing it super well. There are pockets
Oh,
within these companies. There are
I'm
people
sure.
who get it. There are social
Yeah.
selling and employee advocacy program leaders who get it, and they've kind of built a tribe within their firm. So there are
Mm,
pockets of excellence
yes,
in big firms. No big
understood.
firm anywhere has solved this fully at scale. But let's
Absolutely.
talk about where I focus more on large and mid-sized companies. And SAP, I want to bring them into the spotlight. They're leaders in this space, and no, they don't have it all solved, and no, it's not perfect. But for a legacy software company, a huge company, or people around the world that have been in business for a lot of decades, they are very forward thinking in this. They have one of the world's largest social selling motions. It's built on two tools. It's built on LinkedIn Sales Navigator, and it's built on Seismic Live Social, which is my company's product. And those two things together basically, LinkedIn Navigator helps their people know who to talk to and when, and Seismic Live Social provides the content that helps them be more relevant to these people so that they actually want to speak with them. But it's a lot more than tools. SAP really invests in mindset and skill set training, and they've done some really interesting, A/B testing essentially within their people. They have such a large global team that they can do things that smaller companies can't. And one test in particular, I'll just call out. They took two groups of sellers, and in one group, they taught them how to use Sales Navigator and they taught them how to use Seismic Live Social. And then they set them out. The other group,
Okay.
they didn't start with the tools. They started with mindsets. They started with the things we're talking about today, Kerry-Ann. They talked about
Mm.
buyer centricity and client centricity and how to be helpful and valuable to people. They also worked on skill sets with them around etiquette for outreach, around creating valuable posts, around how to slow down your approach and not just be so transactional and not just always be asking for something, and how to give more. So they built good mindsets, they built good skill sets, and then they trained them on the tools. They said, here's two tools that will help you do these things and do them well. And you know what? That
Okay.
second group developed 7 times as much sales pipeline as the first group did. And I think that is a
Wow.
amazing story, because a lot of
It
people, they
is.
just want to skip, they want to say, oh, we don't need all that soft skill stuff. No, no, no. Let's just, let's buy a tool. Let's teach people to use the tool and let's tell them to get on with it. That is not the road to success. And SAP has proven that investing in mindsets and skill sets in addition to tool sets is really critical.
Real quick, Steve, I mean, what's your take? And perhaps again, maybe using these examples you would have shared, and as well as your personal take on this whole thing of empowering employees to build their personal brands. Because I know that we're aligned a lot of the times with, okay, we don't want our employees to be walking, talking billboards kind of a thing. But there is still, I find, some hesitation that some companies have with the whole concept of having employees build their personal brands. Your view, and again, perhaps in reference to a couple of the examples you would have shared, do you find there's general comfort with that line of thinking, employees building their own personal brands, or would they rather they just kind of stay close to home with respect to company generated or related content?
It's all over the board, but it is moving towards more embracing of what you're saying. And we're not all the way there yet. There are absolutely
Oh,
companies
absolutely.
that are full on not comfortable with this. There's also, when you look at larger companies, there's different divisions, different teams, different pockets of places where people are empowered to do this, and others in the same firm where they're not. But I'll tell you, I speak to leaders in this space all the time, every day, literally every day, across industries, from some of the largest companies in the world right on down, and all around the world as well. I was on a call at 9 o'clock last night with a huge company in Australia. So I've got a pretty good view of this. And I'll tell you, it is
Hmm.
changing. And 2 or 3
Okay.
years ago, I had far more conversations where I hit a wall with people and they were like, no, like, we are not okay with that. We do not want to. I had a person who was a VP at a large company tell me that he is explicitly forbidden to talk about anything on LinkedIn except his company. He is explicit.
Wow.
This guy reports to the CMO of a multi-billion-dollar company, and he said, if
VP.
I talk about anything outside of my company and my company's message, I put my job in jeopardy. And I just think that's crazy. Now, maybe if he's sharing, you know, his children's photos on Facebook. Nobody cares. But
Right.
he couldn't talk about marketing. He couldn't talk about leadership. He couldn't talk about digital transformation. He couldn't have talked about any of these things. He was just supposed to promote his company and nothing more. And this is a very senior person, as I've said. I mean, imagine how they treat others if that's how they treat a VP who reports to the CMO. So, but this is changing, and I now very seldom hit that wall. When I talk to these people, as I do all the time, almost always now, they get it. They see it. They want it. And it's more of a how how do we do this conversation instead of a why should we do this conversation, which is what it was a couple years ago. So we're still absolutely not there, but we're getting there.
And I love that perspective, Steve. So I know that by now everyone who's listening and or watching is very intrigued by what they're hearing. And they're probably now asking the question, well, how do I get started? We don't have social selling happening, or maybe we thought we did. Certainly not in the way that we've been describing in this conversation. So, Steve, again, in your area of expertise, I mean, what are some of the initial steps that a company can take to start setting up their own social selling strategy?
Well, no surprise to anyone who's been listening so far. I'm going to start with mindsets. We've talked more about individual mindsets, I think, but let's talk about the corporate mindset. I really believe the first thing you need to do is you need to have a coming together of sales leadership, marketing leadership, some executives, perhaps talent acquisition and HR leadership, coming together and having a real conversation about objectives, because I've seen these programs go very wrong when nobody really talks cross functionally about objectives, and they assume that what they value is all that matters. So you've got salespeople who want it to show quick revenue outcomes. You've got marketing
Oh, yeah.
people who are focused on website traffic and corporate followers and
Mm,
downloads of corporate reports. You've got talent acquisition who is focused on number of applicants and speed to hire and quality of hire. And you've got someone else who's thinking about building a partner network, and they all go into it with these like completely different objectives, and
yeah.
they start contradicting each other. They start telling, that so you've got one team doing one thing, another team doing another thing, and the whole thing just becomes a mess, and everybody gets really frustrated, and nothing much
Yeah.
happens, and then somebody shuts it down. So really coming together, and maybe it's something you can do on your own as a leadership team, or maybe you need someone to come in from the outside and kind of facilitate a conversation that really challenges you to question some of your assumptions, question some of your old approaches, question what you measure. A lot of these things go wrong because they measure the wrong things. They think it's all about sales leads. They think it's all about website traffic, whatever it is they're
Yeah.
measuring. They're focused in the wrong area. So a real coming together on what you're doing, why, and how we're going to go about building a holistically impactful program that's going to be good for our people and their own careers. That's another thing. A lot of companies, they're very selfish, right? They'll go to their people and say, "Oh, this would just be really good for the company if you would do this." And then, no surprise, their people aren't terribly interested. You need to start with talking about how it's going to be good for you, how this is going to help your career, and then collectively how it's going to
That's
help the
right.
firm. It's not one or the other,
That's
it's
right.
both, but we need to start
That's
with
right.
talking about people. So really coming together on that. That's the mindset, it's the foundation, it's the kernel of success that a lot of companies are missing. I think next from that, I would make sure you have clear executive sponsorship and clear program leadership. So you've all come
Yes,
together
indeed.
now. But if you just kind of run this by committee and nobody really owns it and no senior executive really cares, you're going to have a hard time getting traction. You will never get all your executives on board with this. Some of them will not care, they'll ignore it. Some might actually disagree with it. But you need one or two at least very senior executives who understand this, who believe in it, and are gonna be executive sponsors to make sure that this gets the focus and the respect that it needs. But you also need a program leader who is not one of those super senior executives who is not going to have much time to devote this. You need someone who is going to think about training, who is going to think about the tools that you use, who is going to think about measurement and reporting up to the executive sponsors, but also reporting out into the field about what we're accomplishing together and what we can accomplish next.
Yes.
So executive sponsorship and program leadership would be the second thing. And then I think that the third thing is to get on with some of this mindset and skill set training. I mentioned SAP before and the importance of not just starting with tools. Tools are important. I sell a tool that helps with this. I'm not going to disparage tools, far from it.
That's right.
But if you start with tools, if you start with tools and think you can just deploy a tool and flip a switch and become great at social, you're not going to be very happy. You're not going to be very successful. So I would get on with the mindsets and skill sets training that kind of takes that first step, that shared vision of what we're doing, and brings it to your people so that they understand that this is not just about hunting people. This is not just about cheerleading the firm, that this is something much more important for them as individuals and for the firm. And there's a lot more steps after that. But I think if you focused in those three areas, you would be laying some good foundations.
I love that. And I also wanted to address the fact, Steve, that apart from those companies who are probably just getting started, there would be a few, and I mentioned, who are probably doing it or thought they would have been doing it. How do they know if they're doing it right? I mean, is there anything that they can do to kind of do a temperature check
Mhm.
of how they're doing it and to identify the things that they need to do to change to be better?
I think about measurement in three stages. And we all
Okay.
want to get to some kind of tangible revenue outcome. We want to be able to show how this is accelerating our sales, bringing us more revenue, more of the right kind of revenue more quickly. We want to get there. But if we focus there right at the beginning, it's not going to work very well. So I say it's a three-step process. It starts with program metrics. Are your people participating? Are they showing up to training? Are they sharing content on LinkedIn? Are they going beyond just sharing corporate content? Are they sharing more of a mixed diet, a balanced diet of content from different sources that's going to be interesting and relevant to people? Are they bringing their own voice? You've seen that terribly robotic sharing where 500 people in the company all reshare that post with the same little boilerplate introduction that someone in marketing wrote. And it's so uninspired, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's so inauthentic, so robotic. So
Yes,
are your
indeed.
people buying in? Are they starting to do the right things? Are they starting to show up and speak up and share content and bring their voice? So we need to start with the
Yes.
fundamentals of getting people starting to build a new muscle in that space. So that's the program metrics. Then I would start looking at the marketing, and I don't stop looking at the program metrics. I keep looking at them, but I start to layer in marketing metrics. We should see more visits to the website because more of your people are out there doing great stuff and creating some curiosity
Right.
about this firm. You should see traffic going up in the aggregate to the website, but you should also see social and probably LinkedIn in particular rising in importance as a referred traffic source to your website. You should see more high intent demand. When I say high intent demand, I mean, if you, depending on the structure of your business, that may be people requesting a demo. It may be people requesting to speak with the sales team. It may be people reaching directly out to your people saying, I am interested in what you're doing and I think you might be able to help us. Let's talk. That is high intent demand. And that is entirely different from someone downloading your gated ebook and now you have an email address, but they don't even know who you are or care, right? That's low or no intent demand, not even
Yeah,
demand, probably.
not even.
So you ought to see high intent demand rising. You ought to see things like more consumption of your corporate content now, because in the old world, you were just kind of spraying it out there and nobody really cared because it just looked like advertising. But now it comes in the context of trusted relationships and a whole lot of subject matter experts. So more of your corporate content should be consumed. And you can also look at earned media value. Anyone who is in
Yes.
marketing for a firm of, I mean, even pretty small firms, and absolutely
Yes.
true in mid-size and large firms, they know how expensive paid social is. They might be out there spending 10 or $15 a click for their sponsored updates, and they're spending money on sponsored in-mails. They know how expensive paid social is. Well, what if you could earn thousands of clicks through to your content, and thousands of new consumers for your content, and you didn't have to pay for it because it happened from your people getting out there in really authentic ways? You can put a dollar value on that and say, we got 1,000 clicks and our average is $15. That's $15,000 in earned media this month. So these are the marketing metrics. So you start with the program metrics, you layer in the marketing metrics. Now, over time, we're going to get to the revenue metrics, and we're going to see that our people who are out there doing a consistently good job, they start to outperform their peers because they're leveraging a whole new channel on top of the other things they do. They're building their reputation and their relationships, and they're building trust faster and wider and deeper than their colleagues are, and they start to outperform them on revenue metrics. So we get to revenue, but we need to go through the motions to get there, because if we're not doing the right things, we're never going to really achieve the right outcomes.
Steve, this has been a wonderful conversation. And I'm at that part of the conversation where I ask my wonderful guests every single time, of all the things that you would have shared, as hard as that is to do, all the wonderful things you would have shared, what's the key takeaway that, in your view, our listeners or viewers should come away with, having heard everything you would have shared today?
I didn't, I'm glad you asked that, because I didn't explicitly say this, what I'm about to say, but I was all around it.
Sure.
And that
Please.
is, I really believe that we need to rethink what LinkedIn is and what it's for. A lot of people are still really trapped in the old mindset that they were taught 10 or 15 years ago, that LinkedIn is just their resume, it's their CV. We need to move beyond seeing LinkedIn as just an ad channel. And as I was pretty clear, sellers need to move beyond seeing it as just a Rolodex or a hunting ground. I think that if we reimagine LinkedIn as a conversation, I think that's the nugget, that's the central piece, that it's a
Mm.
conversation. It is the greatest ongoing business conversation the world has ever seen. And it's happening with or without us. And no, not all our customers are there, but a lot more are there than you think, because a lot of people just lurk, right? They just read and they learn and they judge and they connect the dots. Uh, if we start to see LinkedIn as a conversation that's happening with or without us, then we start to show up, we start to speak up, we start to be more focused on others. We stop hunting, we stop just being robotic advertisers. We take those skills that we have in our offline world and we bring them online, and we build reputation, we build relationships, we build trust, and all sorts of good things start to come from that. But it starts with mindsets, and more specifically, it starts with the mindset of seeing LinkedIn as something very different from what most people see it today. I think if you get that right and you really kind of think on that and chew on that, a lot of other things start to fall into place.
Love that. Love that. Seeing LinkedIn differently as a conversation. And you've said the word mindset a few times. And I think that's a really great place to start. It's really reshaping the mindset of what social selling is and what it can potentially be and where it is now. And that as companies, there's so many great opportunities that we're leaving on the table if we're not really engaging our team members and empowering them to have the mindset of helping and being generous and putting their audience first, that there's an obvious benefit not just to the company but to themselves as well when they
Absolutely.
do that, and the outcomes can just be tremendous. I mean, Steve, again, has been such a great conversation. And my final question, as I ask all my awesome guests, is how can we, the internal marketing tribe, support you?
Well, You can come find me on LinkedIn. No surprise, I'm going to say that. I don't have a website.
Absolutely.
I don't have a blog. I am all in on LinkedIn. I post almost every day, not every day, because not every day do I have something worth saying, but most days I do. So follow me or send me a connection request. And I hope that I will enrich your LinkedIn experience and enrich your feed with my posts, with the videos that I share, with the links to some podcasts like yours, Kerry-Ann. And I'm also not just posting and ghosting. I'm not just pushing stuff out there. I'm also engaging with others. It is a great big conversation, and I would welcome your listeners and your viewers to come find me, and let's join in that conversation together.
And I second that, folks. Yes, indeed, go and give Steve a follow. So, Steve, thank you again for taking the time and being so very generous with your expertise and your experience in this conversation. I really appreciate it. I appreciate you, and I wish you continued success in everything that you do.
Well, thank you, Kerry-Ann. It has been my absolute pleasure speaking with you today.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Internal Marketing Podcast. I'm sure you got some great takeaways from this conversation, and if you haven't already subscribed to the Internal Marketing Podcast, then please join the tribe. And don't forget to leave a review and share this podcast with anyone whom you believe will find it valuable as well. I'm your host, Kerry-Ann Stimson, and I look forward to your joining me next time.